Hey guys, did you want to learn how to create vibrant artwork with pastels? In this tutorial, I'll show you step by step how I created this golden eagle with a vibrant sky. My name is Kirsty Rebecca and I make drawing and painting tutorials that are easy to follow even if you're just starting out. So there'll be links in the description to all the supplies that I'm using, but the surface that I'm working on is Clairefontaine pastel mat. And this is like a sanded surface, and if you want to work how I do with many layers of pastel, you'll need to work on a sanded surface or something like pastel mat. It grips the pastel much better and allows many layers in comparison to a lot of papers labelled pastel paper. You can get pads like this one with a protective sheet in between each page, or you can get larger sheets where you can cut it to size, and it also comes in a variety of colours, but today I'm just using white. And the first supply I'll be using is pan pastels. And they come in a variety of different size sets, and I have quite a large set, but you don't actually need to have that many. The reason why I love these so much is because they are soft pastel, which means they're vibrant in comparison to pastel pencils, but you can control how much you lay down on your paper much better than a soft pastel stick. This means that you can work in light layers and add detail on top with your pastel pencils, which can be hard to do if you're working with soft pastel sticks. Anytime I want a vibrant background or a vibrant main subject, I always reach for these. The way that you apply them is with these soft tools, and it's SOFFT, and sponges, and there are many different sizes which allow you to fill in smaller areas or larger areas depending on which sponge you use. If you want to try pan pastels, but you don't want to invest in the largest set, you can purchase smaller sets like a set of 10, and I have a full 30-minute long beginner's tutorial showing you how I blend these and use them to create a full piece of artwork, and I'll link that in the description. But basically you can use a piece of printer paper and blend them like you would with paints until you achieve the color that you would like. You can use the soft tools to apply them straight to your artwork straight from the printer paper. I always tape my pastel pieces down with some masking tape, and the reason that I do this is so that you have a clean border around your work once you're finished, which you can hold on to, and it makes it easier to frame as well, so you don't always touch the pastel when you're doing that. A lot of realism artists work with pastel pencils alone because it allows you to add a lot of detail in comparison to soft pastel sticks, but they just don't have the same vibrancy and colour as soft pastels do. So I use pan pastels, which are a soft pastel, in conjunction with the pastel pencils, and this means that you get the best of both worlds. The bright and vibrant colours from the pan pastel, but you can also add details on top for more realistic pieces. So I'm starting with the background first because it's easier to overlay the edges of the main subject on top of the background slightly, which avoids that halo effect that you get around your subject. So it makes it blend in rather than looking like it was a cut and paste on top of your background. And I started by blocking in where the main colours go, using a lot of bright reds and oranges and purples. And a great tip to really make your piece pop is to purposely add some really dark colours in there as well. Having really dark colours next to bright colours makes your bright colours look even more dramatic and vibrant. A lot of people say not to use black, but I disagree with that. I use it all the time, but if you are using it, just make sure that you're blending it with other colours or laying other colours on top of it, just to stop it from looking flat. And if you want a really smooth background, then the more layers of pan pastel that you add, the easier it is to blend smoothly into each other. But if you're using pan pastels as a base layer, then keep in mind if you want to add pastel pencil details on top, don't add too many layers of the pan pastel because you'll feel the tooth of your paper and you won't be able to add more pastels on top very easily. Here I'm using my fingers to help blend out any harsh lines or strokes that the soft tools left behind. Before I move on to the eagle, I just want to show you what happens when you put too much pastel down on your base layer. So this is pan pastels. It is a soft pastel, but you can control how much you add with the soft tools. And here I put one layer down, and it's really easy to add the white pencil on top. It still looks vibrant and it works well. When I go and add a second or a third layer, it still works really quite well when you go in with the pastel pencils. And you can get away with doing a few layers of pan pastels, but there is a point where you can add too many layers and it won't work as well. It gets harder and harder to add pastel pencils on top, and because there is no tooth left for the pencil to grip onto, and it just digs into the previous layers, leaving it not as vibrant. So you can see here, when I go to add the pastel pencils, it's really not vibrant at all. So here I just wanted to show you what happens when you use a Conte stick, and this is just a hard pastel stick. It's easy to add layers on top and it's almost limitless, but the issue with Conte is that it comes in limited colours and it can also leave kind of harsh pastel strokes. It doesn't blend out as easily. So it's not as good for out of focus backgrounds or smooth areas, but it is great in your base layers. You can even add some texture to your pieces, especially working with animals. And this is Rembrandt. It's a soft pastel stick. It's not the softest brand you can get, but it's still considered a soft pastel. It's harder to control than pan pastels, but you can apply a light enough layer to draw on top. It just fills up the tooth of the paper quite quickly. So moving on to the eagle, because of the amount of detail and how big the soft tools are, they wouldn't work quite as well with the pan pastels as it would to just go straight in with the pastel pencils and the harder Conte sticks. And these are good because they have smaller edges than the soft tools, which allows you to get into those smaller areas. I use a variety of brands of pastel pencils, but the main two are the Stabilo Carbothello and the Faber-Castell Pitt pastels. I also like to use these Conte sticks for base layers because they're quite a hard pastel which won't fill up the tooth, but they can still be blended out quite easily. So I'm starting to use the pastel pencils to block in the base colours first, and I'm not being too precise about the details at this point. I'm just trying to get some colour down on the page. Make sure that when you're doing your base layers that you're blocking in the main colours and go slightly darker than what you want your end colour to be, so that way you can add some details on top with lighter colours. So here you can see me using the Conte sticks. It looks quite rough at the moment, but everything will be blended out. I just try and use the pastel pencils for the smallest area so I don't waste them. The Conte sticks are a more cost-effective way of filling in slightly larger areas, and you can also use pan pastels for this as well. When you get to a point where you need to start blending out your pastels, there are a few options that you can use, and I use all of these depending on what I'm working on. The first one is a cotton tip, and most people have these around their home, so it's quite an easy tool if you want to get into smaller spaces, and it blends out really quite nicely. And I'm just showing you what it looks like when you add a second layer on top, how smooth it can get. The second option is a blending stump, and this you can get into even smaller spaces with this one, and they're very cost effective as well. You can also use soft tools to blend out pastel that you've already got on your piece of artwork. You don't have to have pan pastel on your soft tool to use it as a blending tool. And the last option is just your fingers, and this is probably my most used option. It works really quite well, especially for larger areas. And I just wanted to show you what it looks like when you're blending two colors into each other, and they pretty much all blend out exactly the same. And obviously this is only just one layer blending into each other, but if you wanted a more smoother look, just continue to add more layers of pastel. So here you can see me using a cotton tip to blend, which is a good size for this area. And if you work in the same way that I do, you don't want to put too much detail in the first few layers, because to make your artwork look less grainy, you need to blend it out, meaning that by the time you get to your final layer, all the details that you would have added in your first layer won't be there anymore. I decided that I wanted the corners and the edges of the piece to be a bit darker so that it draws the viewer's attention to the eagle's face. So I went back in with the pan pastels to darken it up a bit. So here I'm using my fingers to blend out the background, and it's just to get rid of any of the harsh edges that my soft tools might have left behind. I'm starting to block in where the feathers are. They don't need to be exact, but having them go the right direction and roughly the right size will help the bird look more realistic. Another tip to get your artwork more vibrant is by adding in brighter colors to the areas that seem to be only one color. So for example, all these feathers kind of just look brown, but I'm adding in like reds and blues and purples and that kind of thing to brighten it up a little bit. Here I'm using this triangle shaped soft tool, and I have got a little bit of pan pastel on the tool, but I'm also using it to blend in the layers underneath, and it gives a little bit of a softer look. I didn't want too much detail in the feathers in this piece because I wanted the main focus to be on the eagle's face, and the background is also really vibrant, so I didn't want too much going on with details in unnecessary places. So I'm marking out roughly where the rest of the feathers are going to go with the pastel pencil. And again, they're not in the exact same spot as my reference photo, they're just in the general area that they should be and around about the same size. So I'm just using the pastel pencils again to roughly block in the darkest parts of all the feathers. And I'm just going in with all different colors and brands of pastel pencils to fill in some of the gaps, so that when I blended it out with the soft tool, there'd be plenty of pastel to blend together. So I'm going back through with those pan pastels to add some vibrant colours. And when working in realism, you need to make sure that your values are correct. So your darks are dark enough and your lights are light enough. And it's even more important in this piece because the aim was to have a really vibrant piece. So I had to make sure that my darks were really dark in order for my bright colours to really pop. If you are unsure if your values are correct, take a photo of your artwork and turn it to black and white, and then do the same for your reference photo and compare the two. So now I'm starting the final detail layers, and I put a sheet of paper down on my artwork so that I can rest my hand and keep my pencil steady. If you put your hand straight onto the artwork, it's going to smudge your work and you'll get pastel all over your hands. I also try to work from the top left to the bottom right in the final layers, because even with the paper there, you can still potentially smudge what's underneath or accidentally blend it out. So I try to avoid that by not resting my hand on top of parts that already have final details. And I don't usually have my pastel pencils too sharp because the points tend to break off quite easily, and the reason that I don't mind if the point isn't that sharp is because my work is realistic, not hyper-realistic, and hyper-realism means that you can't tell if your artwork is an artwork or if it's a photo, because your details are so tiny and exact that you can't actually see the pastel strokes at all, and that's not my aim. I want my artwork to look like the animal, but I also want it to look like a painting or drawing, so I don't mind if the pencil strokes are not really tiny. And I also don't have the luxury to spend hundreds of hours on each piece to try and make it look hyper-realistic anyway. So having my pencils pinpoint sharp is not necessary for the amount of detail that I do most of the time. And there are some exceptions, like if I'm doing whiskers or something like that, then I'd rather have the pencil quite sharp. Sharpening pastels can also be really hard sometimes, and I have a video linked in the description that explains how I sharpen my pastel pencils. If you ever get stuck, you can refer to that. And I'm going back and forth between each section using a combination of pan pastels and pencils to hype up the contrast and colours in any area that I think needs it. And I wanted the artwork to look a little more painterly, so I went back in with the pan pastels and started adding some pastel strokes to give it a bit more interest and make it look more like a pastel painting, and then I just blended out any harsh edges with my fingers. Now I'm just going in and adding those last little final details with the pan pastels just to hype up that vibrance in some of the feathers there. I've got many more tutorials you can check out. There's a selection on the screen here, and make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thanks guys, see you next time.